everybody. Welcome to Badge Banter, where we feature some awesome stories from some of our amazing partners about the importance of the ID badge as the foundation of an organization's overall security efforts. I'm Lindsay Martinez from Badge Pass, and I'm super excited to introduce you to today's special guest, Phil Coppola from HID. Thank you so much for being here, Phil.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome, and it's great to see you again. We just did a podcast together not too long ago, so this is a long time coming. I've been watching your stuff intently for a long time.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. The feeling is definitely mutual. I think we've been doing a lot of the same on our end, but I'm sure most of our viewers are familiar with HID, but can you briefly tell us what HID is known for, and more specifically, what your role at HID is?
Okay, well, yeah, HID, it's funny. I was in the Austin office not too long ago, and I just posted a video about this. We kind of did a tour of like a small HID showroom, which showed like a large fraction, or a large smattering of products, but really just a fraction of what it is that HID does in general. So like a lot of people think HID, readers and cards. Yes, that is true, and that's a huge chunk of our business. But what else do we do? Well, we're the manufacturer of Mercury. So if you're using a Mercury-based access control system, that ostensibly is an HID product, right? Readers, credentials, physical cards, mobile credentials, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, as well as all sorts of other cool stuff. Like, for example, I think I have one of these here, like this thing. Like, people don't know that HID makes this. This is an Omni key reader, which is basically like an access control reader, but with a USB interface, or real-time location services devices, beacons, RFID physical tickets, like when the World did the World Cup. The ticket that you got was a physical paper ticket, really cool, but inside of it was an RFID chip, manufactured by HID. We print passports, we do custom cards, we make printers, like all sorts of stuff, right? So if it's access control related or access control adjacent, it's probably an HID product. We're part of the larger ASSA ABLOY family of products as well. Now, who am I? Hello, I'm Phil Coppola. I'm the mobile evangelist at HID. My technical title, my real title, is Director of End User Business Development for our mobile products group. So about a year and a half, 2 years ago now, HID spun up an end user business development team that, we sort of recognized at that point that we were maybe one step removed from the process of being involved with the end user. So HID doesn't sell products to end users, period, right? We go through our trusted OEM partners or through our systems integration channel, and that's it. But a lot of end user organizations, especially some larger organizations, want to have more of a direct level of communication because they don't realize that stuff like this exists until they speak with somebody from HID. So I'm part of that end user business development team, and I oversee our efforts on the mobile side. One of my charters when I first joined the organization was using my knowledge of social media to evangelize all about mobile credentials. That's my job. That's why you see me on LinkedIn quite a bit and waxing poetic about mobile and why I think mobile is the future. Maybe we can have a badge banter about that.
Yes.
But outside of that, I'm a dad of two, and I'm a physical security professional from the ASIS organization as well. I've been, like you, Lindsay, and I didn't ask for this, but I've been in the physical security industry my entire adult career. Like I went into college for political science, and I came out as a security guy. I don't know how it happened, but here we are.
Happens to us all sometimes. So I get that. So Phil, I did not know that your official title wasn't mobile evangelist, and I would like to propose that you change it because that's what that was. I don't know why you need this formal title. That seems irrelevant. But basically, Phil's goal in life is to get people excited about mobile credentials, and so it is fun for us to get together like this because on the flip side of that coin, thanks to Badge Banter and other industry events, I feel like this year I've personally taken on the role as the voice of the physical badge in the industry, and so you could kind of consider us opponents to a certain degree. But that said, Phil and I had a chance to connect in August in person, and I really feel like our viewpoints might not be all that different. So today, rather than taking on a debate-style approach to the mobile versus physical discussion, which is fun, but I don't know that this really needs to be a debate, I'd really like to talk more about the merits of each and how they act as complements to one another. And so we'll kind of get started. Phil, in your opinion, how do mobile credentials and physical badges work best together? And in what verticals do you really see those badges being most complementary to one another?
Yeah, so like the fantastic example of this is the HID facility in Austin, Texas, where we are printing like super secure documents for governments all over the world. And the fact is, in those areas, you can't have a phone. So what do? Well, you need a physical badge. And so in those instances, in like highly regulated markets, it's definitely a hybrid approach. It's let's identify our user populations and understand who needs a physical card with their access control rules on it and who just needs a badge for a culture of security kind of thing, right? I need that badge hanging around my neck so that way you know that I work there. But that doesn't necessarily mean I trust you to keep the integrity of that card secure. In other words, are you going to lose that thing? Are you going to forget it? Or you're not going to bring it in? Am I going to have to constantly be reprinting your badge? If I've got 1,000 employees and only 200 of them need a card, well, that cuts down on that sort of risk and vulnerability. Whereas everybody else can put that on their phone, and now it's to some extent more convenient or the same amount of convenience, right? I have my phone with me all the time, and right, you can trust that I'm not going to lose that. So I think that there's like a hybrid approach there. When we talk about heavily regulated markets, like, you know, in healthcare, for example, you need to have a badge, right? Everybody in healthcare, like, I want to know, am I talking to a doctor? Am I talking to a nurse? Am I talking to, you know, staff? That visual identifier is very important. But does that visual identifier also need to have your access control rules on it? Not always, and not for everybody. That's sort of my take on it. I think that's really what best practice is going to start looking like here in the not so distant future.
I think you're definitely right. And I think you see good examples of that where people have kind of a hybrid where some people's badges do have technology components to it and some of them may not. I see that a lot in like K through 12, for example, where students' badges might not have technology simply because sometimes it's just a cost limitation and employee badges do. It's interesting though, the worst thing I see is when you have a physical badge that is just a blank white card and a personalized badge, and you're carrying both, and the plain white one is the one that opens doors, and then you have the other one that you're wearing, and they're on the same lanyard or whatever. If you lose one, you're going to lose them both, let's be real.
Yep.
That to me is the silliest combination of technologies ever, because just at that point, like, let's please just personalize the technology badge and come up with good practices and procedures for notifying people when badges are lost, and ensuring that when we replace badges, old ones are automatically deactivated. You can build good security practices around them, but if you don't have that, then you're certainly right. If a lost badge would be a risk at that point, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, to that point too, like, I can't tell you how many times, and this is mostly true in like the commercial real estate world, where let's say you're a property manager and each building has a different access control system, and now you have different cards for each one of those. So it's not uncommon for their lanyard to have 5 or 6 plain white badges, and then they're like, which one goes where and for what? And, you know, mobile can solve some of that, because you could put all those credentials inside of one app, or you put them all in your wallet. And when you tap your phone just kind of knows what to do, and it knows which reader you're interacting with, and so therefore which credential to transmit, versus your brain having to remember which one is which. But at the same time, you can get a physical badge with multiple access control credentials in it, and to your point, have your picture on it and right, have it nice and personalized too.
You know, this is funny. You made me think of a story. I was with a customer recently, and we were talking. It was a potential customer, and we were talking about their current system, and they have an ID system that's separate from their access control. And so their teachers carry both cards, kind of like you and I were talking about, but they keep them on separate lanyards. And as a result, a lot of times throughout they wear their physical badge all the time, but they don't always wear the one for door access. They only bring it if they need to access something that they wouldn't normally have access to, like recess or whatever. And as a result, they get like intermingled all the time. Like they'll toss down a plain white card and then another teacher will too. And they'll be like, well, which one was yours? I don't know.
Uh-oh.
So over time, the integrity of their system's been completely lost because now the security director who we were meeting with was like, if I want to know if someone came in on Saturday and I pull the log, it'll say, let's say it's Phil, comes in on Saturday. I then have to go look at the video associated with that event to validate that it actually was Phil, because honestly, like 9 times out of 10, it's not anymore because Lindsay has Phil's badge at this point. And so if you are going to use technology cards and not personalize them in some way where people know whose is whose, like at that point, it's kind of silly. Now, of course, from a mobile credential standpoint, I'm probably not going to have Phil's phone on the weekend.
Or at least if you did, you better have a good reason.
yeah, it's a problem. But anyway, that made me think of that story, and I think you're right. There's definitely has to be a little bit of an element of both when you think about that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, like, as the security industry, we don't always necessarily follow our own best practices or what really should be best practices. So, for example, like, why would you ever just distribute a blank card, right? That doesn't seem logical just from an identification perspective. And you could make the argument, well, maybe on the back of the card is your card number. Who knows what their card number is, right? I mean, maybe you could put a little sticker on it or something to help identify it. But, the cost of a printed badge is not that much more than the cost of a blank badge. So, like, why not? And then you get the added benefit of the visual identifier. So, maybe, like, as a viewer watching this, like, if you are just using plain white cards, please stop.
Please personalize them. So let's dive into that, because you mentioned this about the visual ID component. So that's usually when I talk about mobile credentials versus physical badges. I mean, you've heard me say this countless times. The primary issue that I have with mobile credentials isn't that they're difficult to use or anything like that. I mean, I think that from a user experience standpoint, there's a lot to be said about a mobile credential. But to me, if you switch to completely mobile environment, you're losing that visual indicator of whether or not somebody belongs in a building. So if I wear a badge, you can tell if I belong there. Whereas if my badge is on my phone, like, how do you make that distinction? How do you know Lindsay and Phil belong there? And so obviously this must come up in your discussion like every single day of your life. So what do you recommend customers do to mitigate the risk of losing that visual identifier?
Yeah, it's so industry specific, and even to that extent, sometimes it's very much company specific. So, for example, if you've got, it's a small law office, there's 20 employees. Visual ID is not really a thing for them. Like, I know that's Phil and that's Lindsay. That's fine, unless you change your face somehow, right? So, like, visual ID, no big deal. Bigger company, right? Tens of thousands of users that are intermingling from building to building, from floor to floor. Yeah, visual ID is sort of like this really important aspect of security, or at least a perceived important aspect. And it's funny, HID just put out a 2024 State of the Physical Security Industry report, and in that report they asked like 1,000 end users a bunch of different questions, and one of the questions was around mobile credentials and the role of physical IDs. And more than half of the folks that answered that question said, like, the number one thing holding them back from adopting a mobile credential is this thing about physical identification. So there's a couple of things there. Number one, if you wanted to just completely get rid of your physical ID badge, like your actual card with your face on it, you're going to have to, like, if you're trying to get rid of this need for that physical identifier, then you have to supplement it with something. And what that supplement is going to be is having either some sort of a turnstile or some other check-in process. So I'm reminded of, if anybody watching this has been to ISC West, and if you've stayed at the Venetian, the Venetian gives you a card to get into your room. You could also do a mobile credential. But they give you a card to get into your room. And when you do that, when you go to the elevator bank to get to your room, you have to pass by a security guard. Now, the security guard is going to ask you to see your badge, but they don't really care about that because it's a badge. It's a card that says Venetian on it. It doesn't have my picture on it. What they want you to do is take that card and tap it to a reader, and that reader will either go green light or red light. Green light, you can go. Red light, you got to stop. Fine. That's a great way to ensure the validity of the identity of the person without actually checking their visual ID. Do you belong here? Green light, red light, go or stop, right? So that's one way to supplement. Like if you just really, I don't want to do cards anymore. The other thing is still having the visual identifier, still having the card, but there's no access control rules on here. This is now just a physical identifier, and from a cost basis perspective, this being just a blank piece of plastic is way less expensive than the card with your actual access control rules on it. And then, I could talk for hours about, other benefits that come along with that. But strictly from a physical ID perspective, like as a physical security professional, I believe in this layered approach. I know you do as well. Mm-hmm. You layer these things. Okay, so the let's put the credential on the most secure device that you have, the one that you're least likely to lose. That's your phone. And let's give you an ID that's printed professionally with potentially watermarks, multi-layers, certain ways that you can't replicate this, using a cheap printer that you bought off of eBay. So then you kind of have the best of both worlds there, where you have the physical identifier as well as the super secure credential. And then, like mentioned earlier, a lot of organizations, it's going to be a hybrid approach. It's going to be, all right, I have a population that I can't, a doctor, for example, is not going to be walking to the OR, whip out his phone and tap it to a reader. Like, that's never going to happen. Right? He needs, or she needs, this thing that's going to be much easier. And in those cases, you identify that population and you say, all right, we're gonna give you a choice program. You can either choose to do mobile with a badge that's just a picture, or not. Here's a badge with your access control rules on it. And that, believe it or not, has been the predominant way that we see mobile access being distributed today is in a choice program. Do you want this? Yes or no? You can use this same thing that you've been using for years, or we could do this mobile thing, and you have a good adoption either way.
I like that term of choice program. I wrote it down. I liked it so much because I feel like that makes a lot of sense, giving people flexibility to kind of choose what makes the most sense for them or their organization. I think the complicated thing that you deal with is once you introduce something on a mobile device and as a personal device, if I don't feel like I have the choice to put that on there as an employee, I may potentially push back harder.
Right.
Whereas if you said like, hey, we'll give you either option. If you want to have this mobile credential on your phone, then you can download it. If not, no big deal, because we know that's your personal device. All of a sudden that feels a lot better to me. And I think you would potentially get a lot less pushback about putting something work-related on a personal device if it was a choice. Because at the end of it, if you give me no choice, I know employees, way more likely to push back. But if you're like, hey, no matter what, I'll give you a physical badge, then I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll do both.
100%. And then as the mobile evangelist, I'm hoping for that FOMO. I'm hoping that you see somebody tap their phone and you go, ooh, I like that. How'd you do that? And then listen, there's going to be some people in the organization that are just like, no, absolutely not. I don't want anything for my company on my personal phone. That's fine. The other aspect too is around organizations that do not have a BYOD policy, right? They have company managed phones, and to those organizations, they view it as an additional benefit because not only are they ensuring the validity of the credential, but they're also ensuring the validity of the device that the credential is on. So like there's an extra layer of security there, but I'm a realist too. Most organizations today are pretty much BYOD. And so, right, fewer and fewer companies are doing the whole MDM thing. Although there are, the larger companies are still doing multi-device management, and for them, there is a net benefit.
Makes sense for sure. Well, obviously, we could talk about the merits of physical badges and mobile credentials all day long. I think what's really been exciting for me is badging has just been a part of my life and Badge Pass for my whole career and longer than I've been here for sure. But it's fun for mobile credentials, like their presence in the space has opened up more conversations about badges and the importance of your issuance process and how you manage badges and credentials in a broader light than ever before. And so if anything, I'm grateful for the introduction of mobile credentials because it's allowed us to have much better conversations than I feel like we were having previously. If you had asked me 4 or 5 years ago, I think people were kind of taking the badge issuance process for granted. And now we're like, wait a minute, this is actually a pivotal moment in our security. And it's like a big step. Let's make sure we're doing this right. And
yeah, it's so funny you say that. Like every conversation that I'm involved in is this almost like this existential conversation about what is our policy? What are we doing? Are we doing physical? Are we doing mobile? Are we doing both? And to your point, before this, those conversations just weren't being had, and yes, very much taken for granted. I'm glad that we can rekindle a conversation about credentials. It's just a real quick funny anecdote. Like when I was interviewing for this role at HID, and I learned that it was about selling credentials, I'm like, boring credentials. I got to tell you, this has been the most fun I've had as a salesperson in my entire life because of these exact types of conversations that we're having.
Yep, I love them. So I'm glad to hear that. I obviously don't think it's boring. And so I'm super grateful for the, mobile credentials becoming more mainstream, these conversations happening all the time. It's a lot of fun. So thank you for joining me and having the discussion today, Phil.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, awesome. We hope that you will join us next time as we take you beyond the badge.